Welcome back to The Explainer. We all love a good paradigm shift, right? We're so used to learning about history in this very linear, established way. But today, we are going to explore a radical alternative geographic theory drawn directly from some highly provocative source material. We're going to examine a framework that completely flips the map of human origins right on its head. Honestly, if this is true, everything we think we know about ancient human capability and exploration needs a total rewrite. So what if mitochondrial Eve wasn't actually from Africa? For decades, the established scientific consensus has firmly placed the origin of modern humans and the famous mitochondrial Eve squarely in sub-Saharan Africa. It's the absolute foundation of the out-of-Africa theory. But the source material we are unpacking today proposes a completely different story. It argues for an American origin of Neanderthals and mitochondrial Eve. It's a massive departure from what's typically taught, and my goal today is to just neutrally break down exactly how this theory is constructed, piece by piece, using the evidence and arguments provided in the text. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First up, rewriting human history. Second, mapping haplotype B006. Third, the American mitochondrial Eve. Fourth, navigating the ocean gyres. Fifth, looking at the Surui, Karitiana, and hybrids. And finally, rethinking global dispersal.
All right, Section 1, rewriting human history and challenging the origins paradigm.
To really understand this source, you kind of have to completely reset your mental map. This provocative alternative theory proposes a South American origin for human history, specifically by tracking Neanderthal DNA. So imagine a world map, but instead of focusing your attention on the African continent as the starting point, shift your gaze entirely over to South America. According to the author, South America is the true cradle, the starting point from which key ancient genetic lineages, including those associated with Neanderthals, first emerged before eventually spreading across the globe.
Moving right along to Section 2, mapping haplotype B006, the geographic evidence. Now, a theory this massive obviously requires specific evidence, and the source leans heavily on genetic distribution. This brings us to haplotype B006. In the context of this theory, haplotype B006 is defined as a whole genome DNA marker that basically acts as a proxy or genetic fingerprint for Neanderthal presence. So whenever the source refers to tracking Neanderthals across the globe, they are tracking the geographic presence of this specific haplotype. If we were to color code a map to track this genetic fingerprint, the Americas, both North and South, would be glowing bright red with a heavy concentration of this Neanderthal DNA marker. You'd see a minor splash of color in Europe and some presence in specific parts of India. But notice that last point. According to the source, there is little to absolutely no presence of this Neanderthal DNA in sub-Saharan Africa. The author uses this stark absence in sub-Saharan Africa, contrasted with a heavy concentration in the Americas, as the foundational evidence to argue that Neanderthals are fundamentally American in origin, not European or African. Which brings us to Section 3, the American mitochondrial Eve, and haplogroup L. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the theory takes that genetic evidence and completely upends standard human ancestry. On the left, we have the widely accepted consensus view, an African Eve originating in sub-Saharan Africa, carrying mitochondrial DNA haplogroup L. But over on the right, the source theory posits an American Eve. The claim here is that this exact same haplogroup L actually originated in South America and was originally carried by Neanderthals. The source argues that Neanderthals were the first female or mitochondrial Eve ancestors, completely flipping the standard narrative. To back this up, the theory presents a pretty major chronological claim. The author argues that when you look at the timeline of mtDNA haplogroup L, its presence in Africa appears much later than its presence in the Americas. So in this framework, the genetic timeline flows outward from the Americas. The DNA didn't start in Africa and move west. It started in South America and moved east. Next up, Section 4, navigating the ocean gyres, nature's highways. So if this DNA started in South America, how on earth did it get to the rest of the world? I absolutely love this quote from the text because of how vividly it paints the picture. The author states they were, quote, crossing following the ocean gyre, just like the whales, the turtles, the eels, and all migrating fish. The theory proposes that ancient migrations didn't just rely on slow, grueling overland walking routes. Instead, they caught a ride on massive, naturally occurring ocean currents, the gyres, essentially using them as global superhighways. It's a pretty wild image, right? Neanderthals basically sailing the ocean currents alongside sea turtles. Let's physically trace how this supposedly worked. The journey begins right at the corner of Brazil and the northern coast of South America. From there, the current sweeps them north, across the east coast of North America, reaching up to Iceland and the UK. Finally, the gyre carries them into Western Europe and eventually loops all the way down to the coasts of Africa. Through this massive circular current, the source claims American origin DNA was systematically delivered to Europe, the Mediterranean, and Africa. And then there's the massive Pacific and Austronesian expansion. This route pushes westward a staggering 20,000 kilometers across the planet. It eventually reaches India, the Middle East, and finally delivers this American origin DNA to Madagascar and the eastern coasts of Africa. So what you have are two giant oceanic conveyor belts moving outwards from the Americas in opposite directions. All right, Section 5. Surui, Karitiana, and hybrids. The human element. Let's zoom back into South America for a second. Who exactly was making these epic oceanic journeys? The geographic focal point is a specific triangle right between Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. According to the text, this area is vital for three distinct reasons. First, it's the home of modern human tribes known as the Surui and Karitiana. Second, it's the claimed origin point for what the author calls near-archaic hybrids. And third, this very triangle served as the launch point where Neanderthals were allegedly exported outward on ships. But here is a super crucial point made by the author. While the Surui and Karitiana tribes are central to this geographic launchpad, they did not carry the mtDNA haplogroup L, that Eve DNA, themselves. The author specifically notes this observation to overrule other potential interpretations of the data. So if the local tribes weren't carrying the Eve DNA, who was? Well, the carriers were the archaic hybrids living locally in South America, alongside the Neanderthals. The theory describes this fascinating dynamic, where these modern humans, the ancestors of the Surui and Karitiana, actually supervised and accompanied the Neanderthals and hybrids on these vast ocean journeys. The modern humans facilitated the travel, but the archaic populations were the biological vessels actually carrying the Eve DNA across the ocean gyres. Finally, Section 6. Rethinking global dispersal across rivers and oceans. Because, before you can cross an ocean, you actually have to get to it. The text points out that the mighty Amazon, along with other South American river systems, acted as the primary internal gateways. These rivers connected the inland populations, the Surui, Karitiana, hybrids, and Neanderthals in that Brazil-Bolivia-Peru triangle, directly to those massive Atlantic Ocean gyres. And this brilliantly illustrates the theory's final conclusion about sub-Saharan Africa. In this framework, the DNA of the so-called African Eve did not originate in Africa. Instead, it reached sub-Saharan Africa from the outside in. It dominantly arrived via the Atlantic Ocean crossing, looping down from Europe. It also arrived via the Pacific gyres, hitting Madagascar and the eastern coasts. The source argues that neither the eastern nor the western expansions deeply penetrated sub-Saharan Africa via internal, direct land routes. Instead, they delivered the DNA externally to its coasts via the oceans. So, we've unpacked the claims, the genetic markers, and these massive ocean routes presented in the source. I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If ancient hybrids and modern humans really did collaboratively navigate global ocean gyres outward from the Americas tens of thousands of years ago, how does this map change our view of ancient human capability? It is a staggering alternative framework that requires us to look at the oceans not as barriers, but as the original global highways. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive on the explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.